actual conversation this morning. Me, it's up to 160 million. Somebody else. What? 160? The auto bailout? Me, no, CC Sabathia's new contract with the Yankees. Our fourth story tonight, no, not the Yankees. The survival of GM and Chrysler, Ford not needing any money right now. The House debating the bill tonight. Earlier today, Democrats and the White House agreed to emergency relief to prevent the collapse of GM and Chrysler and map out the road for their long-term health. It's worth $15 billion, or for some perspective, it's worth 656 years of CC Sabathia. One speed bump, congressional Republicans, some of them threatening to filibuster.
So we give them significant amounts of money, $15 billion, so that they go through that process, so that they start that discussion, so that they come back to us months later with a detailed restructuring plan. Well, my reaction to that is pretty simple. I think the average American would say, what? Isn't that putting the cart before the horse? Isn't that, to use a common phrase, just ass backwards?
Actually, average Americans know that emergency relief tends to come before long-term survival efforts, which is why you so rarely hear the paramedics use this phrase. First you give up smoking, then you get CPR. Vitter's failure to recognize ass backwardness, by the way, especially surprising, coming from a man whose name appeared in the phone records of the D.C. madam. Filibuster? He didn't even know her. What's the deal? For one thing, the White House insisted on letting automakers appeal court rulings that they have to abide by state emission standards. In other words, taxpayer dollars that were supposed to help the automakers go green will now help automakers fight taxpayers in court for the right to not go green. One concession Democrats did win. The Cerberus hedge fund, which owns Chrysler but refuses to put its money into it, will now be on the hook if Chrysler defaults. Cerberus's chairman is John Snow, who used to be President Bush's Treasury Secretary, all of which makes perfect sense if you remember that Cerberus is Greek for the three-headed dog from hell. Nevertheless, Republicans want more concessions from the unions, even though the automakers already are slashing jobs and the union already signed a contract to bring wages in line with non-union workers. With us tonight, Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation magazine. Good evening, Chris.
Hey, Keith, I hope you got that check I sent you for tonight's appearance.
Yes, thank you very much. $1.18. The filibuster threat here is partially Senator Shelby's of Alabama, and I'm missing something in this equation. Alabama has given more in tax subsidies per job for non-union jobs at foreign automakers' plants in Alabama than Detroit is asking to save union jobs for American auto manufacturers. Right. I'm missing something here.
Well, you're not missing anything. I mean, this is the worst kept secret in Washington when you talk about the auto bailout. Every time you see Carl Levin or you see Janet Granholm or any Michigan politician, there's an implicit understanding and there's a treatment from the press that they are representing distinct and sometimes narrow geographical interests of the people they represent. The same, though, is true of a lot of the politicians from the Southeast, particularly Alabama. The largest industry in Alabama is the car industry, and we're talking about throwing taxpayer dollars at the big three. Well, they've been throwing taxpayer dollars at Toyota for years in Alabama, and no one raises a stink about that.
And to what degree also is in this an opportunity that the Republicans see for kneecapping a big union?
Yeah, I mean, at the level of power politics, I think that's a huge part of it. And you see it in terms of, if you read the conservative press, people are obsessed with the erroneous number that it's somehow $70 an hour in labor. We know that's not true. David Leonhardt had a very good piece in the Times on that today. Labor is not the big issue. Labor costs are not the big issue. There are a lot of issues, but car companies across the world are in very bad shape right now. They're in bad shape in Sweden. The car companies in France have required a government bailout, and the Japanese car companies are in bad shape. So the big three have a lot of long-term problems, and they've been very mismanaged. I think there's sort of consensus on that. But the acute crisis is not due to those long-term trends necessarily. So,
well, the converse part about this politically, though, are Democrats buckling here just to get something done? I mean, the car czar was supposed to be able to block deals of $25 million or more if he thought they were antithetical to the success of the organization. Now that's been raised to $100 million. The limits on payments to executives are not really limits of any kind. Bonuses can still go ahead. Don't do it if it's going to hurt the company, which is really strong language. Right. And the Republicans are going to get at least some rollbacks on these environmental issues. How much more can Democrats bend on this, and why are they bending even this much?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know how much more they can bend. I think you're right that the exigencies of the moment are making them give away a lot. The problem is nobody in the entire universe right now has any leverage over the White House. I mean, really, it's crazy. I mean, it's not dissimilar to what's going on in Illinois, right? I mean, no one can make this guy do anything. And so if you really think that what you're staring down the barrel of is a catastrophic bankruptcy, which would involve possible job losses up to 3 million people, then the crisis atmosphere, which we've been kind of legislating under for several months now, is what's really guiding the legislative process more than any sort of long-term view of what you want your strategic outcomes to be.
This is utterly off the topic, and we'll talk about it another time, but I'm beginning to think we need a constitutional amendment to shorten the transition period between the election and the inaugural, like maybe 48 hours or something.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Last on this point, the David Vitter argument today. This boils down to, first, you guys stop bleeding, then we'll give you Band-Aids. That makes as little sense as saying we're just going to throw all the money here in a big pile and you can come and get it as you need it.
Yeah, look, I mean, David Vitter's a joke. I mean, there's no real reason to pay much attention to what he says. I mean, the fact of the matter is, for a certain contingent of the Republican Party, and Richard Shelby is among this, and Shelby, to his credit, opposed the financial bailout, so he's on pretty firm ideological footing. For them, this is a core issue, right? I mean, for conservatives, there is a sort of upside to broad economic pain that could come with the dissolution of these these companies, and that is the kind of creative destruction of capitalism. The question is, you know, can we deal with that right now, or will that be too much for this economy to bear? And, you know, for the Republicans that stick to their guns, you know, I guess God bless them, but I don't think the rest of the country necessarily wants that.
Chris Hayes, the Washington editor of The Nation, as always, great thanks, and thanks for the $1.18 check.
Anytime, Keith.